I've finally done it. I get to upgrade from this to this router table. And it's all thanks to me finally finding this used router lift. When it comes to buying tools, I can be a bit cheap. So when it came to building a router table, I didn't want to spend £200 just on the lift. So when I finally found a used one on eBay for £130, I knew it was finally time to build a router table. And if you think this is just like any other router table built on YouTube, you might be mistaken. Since I had to wait so long to find a lift, I had lots of time to come up with clever things to add to this table. Also, make sure to stick around till the end of the video for a full cost breakdown, and we're gonna test this dust collection to see what's good and what we can improve.
The first thing we need to take care of is to prepare the material for the tabletop. I'm using 18mm MDF because it's nice and flat, plus it's heavy. To get a thicker top, I'm laminating 2 pieces on top of each other. And after using pretty much every clamp in my shop, I'm adding a couple weights to the center, where the clamps can't reach. Also, to add a little more clamping force, I'm adding some screws to the very center. Now that we have the top prepared, we can start cutting up some plywood sheets for the cupboard and drawers. I prefer to cut all my pieces in the beginning of a project, so I can use some of them as spacers when assembling. When building shop furniture, I like to keep it simple. So just like these cupboards, we're just going to use wood glue and nails to put the router table together. Something I didn't show you is that I sanded off any sharp edges before assembling. This is technically not fully necessary for shop furniture, but it's a good habit to have, especially when building fine furniture. Because there's only one middle divider, I cut another spacer so I can just lay the middle on top and then nail it into place. If you're wondering why I'm using nails instead of pocket holes like most people on YouTube seem to do, it's simply because I don't have a pocket hole jig, and nails do the job just fine. By using clamps, I can make sure everything stays lined up correctly. To place the middle wall correctly, I'm using the drawer fronts as spacers, and then using 2 4mm shims to account for the 2mm gap on all sides of the drawers. And yes, I was talking about how I'm using glue and nails for the construction of the cupboard, but in case I place this middle wall a little wrong, I prefer to just screw it in. Now for one of the special features of this router table, because I have a rather small shop, I always look for ways to save space. So I don't want to spare the space that dust collection would take up. By putting this pipe into the side, I can connect the dust collection on the side rather than the back. This way I can keep the router table up against the wall when in use. If I had a 4-inch hole saw, I would just use that to cut the holes. But since I don't, I just use my good old jigsaw. One important thing when screwing 2 pieces of plywood together is to pre-drill both pieces, as plywood edges are very prone to splitting. With the Y piece in place, I can now put the back on the router housing. And by adding a 4-inch duct flange, I'm adding dust collection directly to the router. And I can connect it all with some flex hose. The last bit I need to add for dust collection is to drill a hole through the side to connect some 2.5-inch flex hose. This will later be connected to the router fence. Since drawer slides are really expensive, I like to make my own. These drawers are just made with wood. By just routing a groove into the side and making runners out of wood, we can save lots of money. Lots of money indeed. If we lowball the cost of drawer slides at £10 a pair, we're looking at a whopping £90 of added cost. Plus, if we use drawer slides, we lose ½ an inch on each side of the drawer. To make the drawers run well, we need to make sure that the groove in the drawer sides is as clean as possible. And since the bit I was using is very cheap and old, I have to give them a bit of a sanding. One last thing we have to do before we get to assemble the drawers is to cut a second groove in the bottom of the drawers. We do this by making cuts at the table saw, slowly sneaking up on the final thickness. This groove is there to fit the drawer bottoms into. We also have to put a groove into the drawer fronts. And then lastly, we just have to cut the drawer bottoms out of 9mm plywood. Now we get to assemble the drawers. Again, we're just using glue and nails. I'm first nailing both sides onto the back piece. And then simply nailing the front against the side pieces. Because we cut the back piece a little shorter than the other pieces, we can now just slide the bottom in. Or in my case, since I cut the drawer bottoms too wide, I have to use my good friend the mallet to persuade them into place. Next we can work on the drawer slides. If you have leftover hardwood, I would recommend using that, but softwood will do the trick just fine. We make the slides slightly thinner than the grooves we've cut into the drawer sides. To determine the width of the drawer slides, we take the width of the opening for the drawer and we subtract it by the drawer's width. Then we divide that number by 2 and add the depth of the groove. Lastly, I recommend to give a little room, because if we make it too exact, it will never run smooth. So we subtract another millimeter. Did that all make sense? No? Then here's an easier way. Make the slides as big as the grooves are deep, plus 1mm. This will work because we want a 2mm gap on each side of the drawer. To finish off the drawer slides, I'm spraying them with some silicone spray. This will help them glide better. Alternatively, you can also rub some candle wax on them. Before we can install the drawers, we need to put some drawer pulls on, because otherwise we will struggle to take them back out. Since I don't have any fancy jigs to position the drawer pulls, I'm using the drawers themselves to copy the holes onto other drawers. This also works if the drawers are different sizes.
To mount the drawer slides, I cut a couple scrap pieces that are exactly 2mm taller as the bottom of this groove, and one is 4mm taller. That will help me account for the different gaps. At the bottom I have a 2mm gap, so I'm using a 2mm spacer, grabbing a drawer slide, making it flush with the back, and then I'm screwing it on. And the same thing for the other side. Then I can take one of the drawers and slide it right in. It's running a bit harsh right now, but after running it a bit more, it spreads the silicone spray around into the slides and it just glides. Right now there's no stopper, so this goes deeper in than it's supposed to, but later on there'll be a back in here, and then the back will stop it. I don't want the drawer slides to bang on here all the time, because after a while closing this will come loose. Now to mount the drawer that goes above it, instead of the piece that is 2mm taller, just this one that we used for the bottom, I'm going to use this one which is 4mm taller, and mount the slides again. Now I can grab another drawer, slide it right in, and we get a nice even gap all around.
One disadvantage of routing the dust collection out of the side instead of the back, we're losing a little depth for the right drawers. Since the back won't be the stopper for these drawers, we need to add one. For the top of the cupboard, we're using 2 strips that we're just screwing to the top and then gluing and nailing to the sides. There are 2 reasons why we're using strips instead of solid pieces of plywood. Reason 1, to allow some space in the center where the router lift later will sit. And secondly, to save on material. I like to put as many tools as I can on wheels. So yes, this router table too will be on lockable casters. To make the top a little bit neater and to enable the dust hose to come out the top, we're cutting part of it out and then using a flush trim bit to clean up the cut. We're doing the same thing for the back of the cupboard. I'm using 18mm plywood for this to add a little extra weight and stability to the cupboard. This will help it not move around when I'm routing.
With the basic cupboard constructed, we can now take care of mounting this on and off switch. I'm planning on putting it around here, and I'll build a little box along here where I can put these wires in, like so. And then I need to get this wire from the motor through the cupboard, through the wall, and then into this box. Fortunately, dust collection in router tables needs extra airflow. Usually you do that through holes in the door or holes in the back. I'm gonna put some holes in the back and I can put the wire through those holes.
To construct a little box that holds the on-off switch and hides the wires, I'm again just using glue and nails. Although nails probably would have been enough. In this case, it doesn't need to be very strong. What I didn't show is that I had to drill out a bit of space to fit the huge UK plugs. Now I can just screw the box to the cupboard. The next thing we're making is the door for the router housing. I'm simply cutting a couple strips out of plywood and then cutting a groove into them. I should have constructed this door with half laps, but I was too much in the butt joint, glue and nail zone. Because my camera ran out of battery, what you won't see is me nailing the door together, which split the plywood and made me have to glue the plywood back together. While the glue on the door dries, we can now work on the tabletop. First, I get to use my beautiful panel saw to cut the top to size, which, if I haven't mentioned before, is so much superior to the standard cabinet saws you Americans use. Anyways, because I'm too lazy and cheap to put a hardwood edge on the top, I'm simply routing the edges over using a good old palm router. This should make them strong enough and stop them from being damaged too much. After some quick sanding, we can work on the opening for the router lift. Because I want this to be precise, and I don't want to make another tabletop, I'm first making a template. To do this, I'm using strips of MDF that I'm fixing to the base with double-sided tape. This way I can copy the exact dimensions of the lift. The only point of failure are the rounded corners. To get those, I'm using a hole saw with the same radius as the corners of the router lift. And then to finish off the template, I'm using a flush trim bit to route out the rest of the material. But to be honest, I wasn't 100% satisfied with the results, because I didn't drill the holes perfectly. Using a hole saw just isn't the best way, so I'm going to try again with a different method. I'm using this 2-part wood filler. This stuff gets very hard roughly 15 minutes after mixing. By stuffing it into the corners, it should give me the perfect template. We'll find out if this method worked in just a minute. But while we give the stuff some time to dry, let's finish off the door. I was considering using proper cabinet hinges, but these hinges were way cheaper at only £1 for the pair. So I guess we're doing some quote-unquote proper woodworking and recessing these hinges into the door. To optimize the dust collection in the router housing, I need to position the flex hose opening as close to the bottom as possible. However, Since the flange has a 2 cm rim around it, I couldn't place the opening any lower, so instead I'm raising the bottom. I noticed that when I'm putting the top on, there would be air gaps from the router housing to the drawers, so I cut some pieces to infill that. Next, I'm giving the door a proper place to stop. This will prevent it from being sucked in when the dust collection is on. And it should stop the air from escaping. The last thing to finish off the door is to put on a handle. Back to the router lift. And this should just pop out and... well, that didn't go as planned. Luckily these corners seem to just snap off, and I can put them back in place. After sanding them flat, I can glue them back into place using some CA glue. To finish off the template version 2, I'm just going to route it flush, and we get a template that should fit perfectly, after some sanding that is. Again, double-sided tape is our best friend when it comes to template routing. Little tip for setting the depth of your cut when template routing. By putting the lift on top of the template and then putting the router on top of that, while lowering the bit all the way to the workpiece, it should cut the correct depth. Since MDF makes so much dust, I had to ask my partner to be my dust collection. And with her help, I got the bulk routed out in no time. To remove the rest of the material, I could then just take a jigsaw to it. After some minor adjusting, the router lift fit like a glove.
The next thing I'd have to do is mount the fence. Since the fence hasn't arrived yet, I'm going to use that time to paint the cupboard and fill the nail holes.
One eternity later.
Look at what just arrived. Let's see what's in here. Okay, got our T-track. Aluminum grip, this part is plastic. That's what's gonna ride in the T-track. Then we have some ducting. We have some flip stops, and these are micro adjusts for the fence. And here we have the fence itself. Let's open that up. The manual. And the fence itself. Little cover piece. This looks very solid. Very nice.
With this amazing unboxing out of the way, we can now get to the actual installing of the fence. Since the T-track comes with a scale, I need to line up the 0 with the 0 position on the router lift. After routing out the space for the T-track to sit, all that's left to do is square up the edges with the chisel. One more T-track I want to add is one going all the way across the table for adding accessories later, like featherboards or a mitre gauge. I thought the bit was wide enough to fit the T-track in one pass, but this gives me a chance to show you a neat trick. If you just need to route a tiny bit more, instead of moving the fence, you can just add some tape instead. This will offset the router by the thickness of the tape and let you creep up to your measurement. One last thing I need to add to the tabletop is a way for the flex hose to come up to the fence. Otherwise, if we don't add this, we couldn't put the table up against the wall. And then what do we do all that effort for to place the dust collection port to the side? To finish off the tabletop, I'm going to add some varnish. This will help keep the top clean and smooth. I first wipe any dust off the surface, and then apply a thin coat to the entire top using a brush. Even though the underside doesn't really matter and won't be seen, I'm still applying a coat there too. If you only apply finish to one side, it makes the top absorb moisture unevenly and will cause it to warp. After the first coat is dry, you quickly go over the whole top with 240 grit sandpaper and apply a second coat. Now all that's left to do is assembly. When the top is in place, I can't access the wires anymore, so I have to feed it in place ahead of time. Securing the router in place is very easy. Simply tighten the thumb screw and then tighten the 4 set screws with an Allen key. I'm simply using 4 screws to hold the top in place. There won't be much force acting on the top, so this will be just fine. The router lift comes with many set screws we can use to make it perfectly flush with the table. After screwing the 4 corners into place, I actually had to readjust them, as the screws were pressing the set screws into the soft MDF. To position the scale on the T-track correctly, I put a bit in the router that has a point I can measure from. This way the scale will show me how far the fence is away from the center of the router, but I will most likely usually just measure from the bit to the fence anyways. Now I can add the flip stops to the fence and insert the micro adjusts. The little top drawer holds all the bits I will need for bit changes. I want the other small drawers to hold my bits, but I don't like how high the sides of my drawers are. So I'm going to add a little window to them. And what better way to do that than to finally use my new router table to template route. For now I don't have that many router bits, so I'm only going to load up the 2 long drawers on the left side. By making a little drilling template, I can drill through both boards at once. I'm making one board for 1/4 inch shank router bits, and then I can simply widen the holes using a larger drill bit for 1/2 inch router bits. I've seen people make way better versions of this, but this will do the trick for me for now. But we might take another look at the bit storage in a future video, when I have more bits to worry about. For now, I'm just filling my drawers with all the router bits, accessories and routers I have. Sadly my microphone died during this part, so I'm just going to have to add a voiceover. I've set up the first dust collection test, a rabbit. I've put on the little cover piece to restrict the airflow to the cutting area. This cut should be pretty easy for the dust collection to handle. And as you can see, there's basically no dust left on the table. And the same inside the cupboard. Only a couple bits in the corners. But it seems like there's quite a bit of residue left in the pipe. So I'm going to do a couple more test cuts. It looks like the amount of dust that collects is being collected in time and doesn't seem to be affecting the dust collection negatively. For the next test cut, we're doing something a bit harder, a large groove. Since for this cut the fence dust collection can't reach the bit anyways, I've closed the fence fully. I'm hoping this will kinda work like a blast gate. To optimize the dust collection from below, I'm putting a ring in with a larger gap. We're gonna test different sizes later as well. And Jesus Christ, that went horrible. There's dust everywhere. And again, some dust collected in the left corner. For the next test cut, I've closed 2 of the 4 holes in the back. And great success. There was a bit of dust left on the table, but nothing too bad considering how hard this cut is. Let's try a smaller opening. And the result is much worse. Let's try let some more air in by opening the fence up a little. And that basically made no difference. We have 1 ring left with a larger opening, so let's try that too. It seems like the larger opening is helping to pick up the initial dust better. But it seems to be a little worse at picking up the dust during the cut and is leaving a little more residue on the table. Now that we've done some basic testing, let's improve the collection inside the box. Since the corners are collecting a lot of dust, we're going to infill them. After some testing, I figured out I need to put the mitre fence at 60 degrees and the blade at 55 degrees. Then, by putting a stop block on the fence, I can make 3 cuts by rotating the piece in between. And I receive a perfect fitting corner that I can use to infill the corners of the box. After some more test cutting, there still seems to be some dust collecting on top of the corner, but nothing relevant. Next test I want to make is to put the holes in the front instead of the back. By closing up the back holes with some tape, and making a replacement door with 1 hole. And it seems like 1 hole is not giving us good results. So let's add another hole and try again. It looks a little better, but not much. So 1 more hole and we basically get the same results. So let's try rotate the holes to the top to see if that makes it any better. But no, it makes it much worse. Now all the dust is just collecting at the front of the door. I ran 1 more experiment. I closed 2 out of the 4 holes in the back and closed up the front fully. And I thought that wouldn't be as good, but there's basically no dust. There's a bit here, but before there was lots piling up in the front. So I think 2 holes in the back are a good solution. Okay, let's go over the things we changed. We've added these 2 triangles to help direct the airflow into here. And we've blocked off the 2 middle holes to only leave 2 holes in the back. So, and the last thing I want to do with you is a little cost breakdown. Got the numbers right here. So, I got all the sheet material from Wix, which is roughly £83. Deducting the wheels and the on-off switch I got off Amazon for £72. The fence I got on eBay. It's called Enjoy Wood, if you want to buy it too. It's a pretty decent fence, I'd say, for the price £131. The lift I also got off eBay used. Normally these go for $250, $300 I think. And I paid used £129. The router is a Dewalt DW618. It's a little 2¼ horsepower router. There's many other dupes like that out there. And for that I paid £147 off Amazon. So bringing our grand total up to £562. So to end this video, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.